The Scooby-Doo episodes featured in this video are older than I am, and I'm old enough to remember when televisions had knobs. But for whoever needs to hear it, this video is filled with spoilers. As anyone who's ever watched a movie or TV show, read a book, or literally absorbed any type of media can understand, the antagonist of a story can often make or break the audience's enjoyment. Let's just say Batman isn't as popular as he is because people can't get enough of a brooding rich guy. Perhaps if real-life billionaires had psychopathic clowns to keep them busy, they wouldn't have the time to screw up our nice things. But how does one rank a villain? Recognizing a good one needs more to go on than a simple gut feeling of, this guy is cool, that guy is lame. I decided to base my Scooby villain analysis using the following 3 criteria on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being Harry and Marv, and 5 being Professor Moriarty. The 3 criteria are design, outfit, and operation, and when averaged together will provide what I call the DOO or Do score. You know, I really thought this was clever at the time, but now I'm just hoping it's not cringe-inducing. Before embarking on any venture, whether it's starting your own business, creating a YouTube channel, please like and subscribe! Or in the case of a Scooby-Doo villain, a criminal enterprise, adequate planning is essential. Granted, most success or failure in life depends on luck, but the odds are greatly improved if you're careful to think things through. Considering the risks of failure in crime, where if caught, the penalty could result in decades spent in prison or even severe bodily injury, criminals need to ask themselves if the crime is worth it. Will the financial benefits outweigh the cost? How easy would it be to get caught? Any child on Halloween night knows that a good costume can mean the difference between being handed a full-size Three Musketeers bar or a stale circus peanut. Creativity, as well as the quality of the disguise, is essential, and a good Scooby-Doo villain is an original Scooby-Doo villain. But thought must also be given to how effective a costume will be when it comes to the principal reason for most villain disguises: discouraging nosy busybodies from hanging around. In other words, how scary is the villain? Finally, the best laid plans in the world with the most frightening monster makeup outside of Rob Bottin's garage means nothing if the villain is inept. What actions do they take to protect their scheme? Are they proactive when dealing with meddling kids, or do they simply react to their snooping by yelling at them and chasing them through hallways? How determined is the villain when it comes to executing their plans? How far would they go? Would they even be willing to commit murder? Now let's begin. In What a Night for a Night, the Scooby Gang stumbles upon the scene of a kidnapping that leads them to investigate a nearby museum where they are confronted by a haunted suit of armor. This very first episode ever of the Scooby-Doo franchise features corrupt museum curator, Mr. Wickles, disguising himself as the Black Knight to cover up his crime of stealing pieces of art by replacing the original works with forgeries. As curator, Wickles would have several advantages in such a scheme. His position would undoubtedly put him into contact with unscrupulous art collectors. He would have access to the museum when no one else was around. He would be able to judge whether a fake piece of art would fool the casual observer, and as it was his job to be the first to raise any alarms over suspected forgeries, he would be able to refrain from reporting them. However, his position would also entail some extremely obvious disadvantages. As a mere curator, he would not have the authority to deny the museum's directors from loaning pieces to other museums or institutions that request them, nor could he continually deny academics who want to examine certain works during their research, either of which would inevitably result in experts spotting the fakes. Once one forgery was uncovered, the subsequent investigation would quickly reveal all the others, and suspicion would immediately fall upon the person responsible for overseeing the exhibits. Wickles' crime was potentially very lucrative, but would easily fall apart with barely any oversight. At best, he would steal as much as possible before changing his name and leaving the country for a port of call with no extradition treaty. Even if he managed to make it to retirement age, it wouldn't take long for his replacement to discover the thefts, and investigators would be quickly knocking on the door of his Florida retirement condo. The fact that a visiting archaeologist from England was enough to make him panic and immediately resort to kidnapping shows a distinct lack of confidence in his skills as a forger, so this was not a well thought out criminal endeavor. I'm giving Wickles a 2.5 out of 5 for the design of his plan. At first, the Black Knight costume could be considered clever as it directly linked to something that the visiting archaeologist was delivering, potentially throwing investigators off the scent that something illegal was happening at the museum. Its seemingly spur-of-the-moment creation could also be considered an indication of Wickles' ability to improvise. However, the costume itself was bulky and unwieldy, as evidenced by Wickles tripping over Velma, presumably because he couldn't see her crawling in front of him. This fall even caused him to get trapped in a pillory. Incidentally, how in the hell did Wickles even get out of that predicament? He was trapped by the latch, and no one else would have helped him out. The curator is also short, middle-aged, and somewhat overweight, while that suit of armor is plate mail and extremely heavy. It's difficult enough for trained soldiers in the peak of physical condition to wear with much mobility, so it was not the best costume for someone with his physique to pick, which may explain why it was so easy for the gang to stop him. Of course, like many Scooby villains, he occasionally exhibits superhuman strength, like when he's able to easily lift and toss a wooden table holding Shaggy and Scooby hard enough to smash a stone wall, all while wearing a medieval suit of armor that easily weighs 50 pounds or more. As we constantly hear the helmet creak every time Wickles turns his head, we can assume that armor is legitimate and not some papier-mâché mock-up. There's even a scene when Wickles punches through one of his fake paintings, something that presumably cost a lot of time and money to create. Despite the desperation he must have felt in capturing the gang, this was still a very expensive mistake to make, possibly due to the poor vision afforded by the helmet he was wearing. Finally, a suit of armor, even a haunted one, isn't very frightening by itself as it's not inherently supernatural. Most people would assume it's just a guy inside chasing them. I'm giving this outfit a 2 out of 5. There wasn't much thought put into it by the villain, who seemed to be making it up as he went along. The episode begins with Mr. Wickles, disguised as the Black Knight, ambushing Professor Hydewhite, who is on his way to deliver the armor to the museum. So what was Wickles' end goal with the kidnapping? Why did he bother wearing the heavy armor and sneaking into the crate to ambush the professor, especially since he ended up just hiding him in the museum? Why didn't he just wait at the museum for the professor to arrive and sneak up behind and whack him on the head? He could then drive the truck 100 miles away, take a bus back to the museum, and claim that he hadn't seen or heard from Hydewhite after the armor was delivered. In fact, Wickles didn't even have to be the one to drive the kidnapped professor away. There was a vague mention of his gang at the end, but the only other people featured in the episode were the 2 museum workers, who are shown here unfettered while Wickles is handcuffed, so presumably they're not under arrest and just innocent museum employees. So why didn't Wickles kidnap them too? Wasn't it also possible for them to stumble onto his crime? And nowhere in the episode did it say Hydewhite was doing more than delivering the armor to the museum. So why bother eliminating him? Even if he was staying for a while, he was an archaeologist, not an art expert, and unlikely to spot fake paintings in the brief time he was in the country. And if he was a visiting academic with plans to remain at the museum for an extended stay, he wouldn't necessarily need or be given access to the entire museum, especially not hands-on with the exhibits. The art forgery room was hidden behind a secret door, so where was the danger of having Hydewhite around? Of course, Wickles was careless with his art supplies, which led the gang to his hidden room in the first place, so it's possible Hydewhite would have found it just as easily, especially since, as an archaeologist, he might have been able to tell at a glance that the Egyptian sarcophagus hiding the secret art forgery room was fake or otherwise modified from its original form. Worst of all, after his kidnapping, Professor Hydewhite was kept in the museum the entire time, tied up and hidden in what appears to be some sort of Native American headdress, mask, and blanket. Wickles had a secret room, but he kept his victim out in the open? For hours? Standing up with nothing to brace him? Hyde White was clearly British because he was polite enough to accommodate the wishes of his kidnapper by not only standing stock still the entire time, but not making any noise or taking any bathroom breaks. Maybe that's the reason why Scooby was able to lead the gang to him in the end. Speaking of the gang, Wickles was the curator, and instead of chasing them out of the museum disguised as the Black Knight, wouldn't it have been smarter just to call the police to get rid of them as trespassers, or even have them arrested for breaking and entering and vandalism? If he wanted to avoid too much scrutiny, he could have even made the excuse that he didn't want to press charges against Fred and the others since they had been nice enough to bring back the armor and just bar them from the museum. In that scenario, the police would likely just kick the kids out and not bother investigating any further. I'm giving Wickles another 2 out of 5 for Operation. He wasn't very successful at chasing the kids, got himself trapped once, and was very sloppy at hiding his crime. In conclusion, Mr. Wickles, the Black Knight, gets a due score of 2.2 out of 5. Who's driving the truck? A foggy sea outing turns into a day of scares after the gang run aground on a spooky island where the only shelter is a haunted castle. The villain in Hassel in the Castle is a fugitive ex-stage magician known only as Bluestone the Great, hiding out on a deserted island while looking for the legendary lost treasure of Vasquez the Pirate.
That's Vasquez the Pirate. He sailed the seas in 1612.
The Golden Age of piracy began in 1650, Scooby writers. That's about 40 years later. Bluestone uses his knowledge of mirrors and wirework to pretend to be a ghost to scare others off the island while he searches for clues to the pirate treasure. Staying on a deserted island makes it easier to hide from the authorities, so Bluestone picked a good spot for that. It also came with the bonus of possible hidden pirate treasure, and with no one else around, he had the run of the place without fear of being caught. Unlike most other Scooby villains, Bluestone also had a background where it makes sense that he can create illusions that would fool any meddling kids who might show up to investigate. Whether or not this would work against law enforcement armed with a SWAT team and qualified immunity still needs to be determined, however. Bluestone was already wanted by the police in 6 states when he camped out on Vasquez Island, so the danger of being caught was already sky high. But as for the specific scheme featured in the episode, he gets a 4 out of 5 for knowing where to hide and using his existing talents to the best of his abilities. Bluestone's disguise is literally a sheet with eye holes cut out of it. Who is his fashion consultant? Charlie Brown? If this was his idea of a clever costume, I'm starting to see why he might have been forced to turn from stage magic to crime. All of the technical knowledge in the world is pointless if you're too lazy or unimaginative to give any consideration toward appearances. This phantom literally looks like someone with a sheet over their body. It's no surprise that Fred, Shaggy, and Scooby even tried chasing him, and it was only his skill as a stage magician that saved his scheme. The gang are more impressed by the ghost walking through walls than the ghost itself. The Vasquez Castle Phantom gets a paltry 1 out of 5 for his Night Before Comic-Con cosplay attempt. Many of Bluestone's actions in this episode are a real head-scratcher. After running around on Vasquez Island, the gang's first hint that something is amiss is when Scooby discovers a warning written on the back of a map fragment. If Bluestone wrote that to try and scare others off, why did he leave it in a random spot on the beach? Or did he plan on some random crab being nice enough to deliver it? Or did Bluestone train that crab? In addition to the aforementioned ghost disguise, Bluestone also rigged several other supernatural effects in the castle, including a talking skull and a floating ham sandwich and mustard bottle. I have to ask, how in the hell did Bluestone know Shaggy would ask for a ham sandwich as well as mustard? For most magic tricks, the magician uses what's called a force to get their audience member to pick a card or other object that the magician already had rigged up beforehand. It gives the illusion of free choice and makes the trick more impressive. But here, Bluestone already knew, somehow, what Shaggy would ask for. If he's that good at his magic act, why did he have to resort to crime? Perhaps the answer to that is how amazingly sloppy Bluestone appears to be. He left so many obvious clues lying around the castle, including a magician's hat and wand, a pair of magic cabinets, magic carpet, and even a box for the sawing a lady in half trick. Inspector Clouseau would be able to figure out what was going on with all of that. Another example of Bluestone's carelessness. He was somehow able to fashion an extremely lifelike prop of Shaggy's head with fully articulated mouth to perform the sawing in half trick with a floating saw blade, but somehow forgot that the trick is usually performed in the opposite manner, with the victim's head and body in the top half with the prop feet or body of a hidden assistant in the bottom. What exactly was the point of all these magic tricks scattered throughout the castle? Sure, the skull was creepy, and a coward like Shaggy would be afraid of being cut in half, but the floating sandwich? Was Bluestone ahead of his time when it comes to being scary and decided that psychological horror was more effective than jump scares and chasing victims while wearing a costume? Yeah, maybe not if that was his idea of a scary ghost. Regardless of everything that came before, the gang was unable to leave the island due to their beached boat. Wouldn't it have made more sense for Bluestone to simply hide out somewhere in the castle until the Coast Guard found the boat and picked up the trespassers? Which is how they were rescued in the end. What's the point of trying to scare meddling kids off the island when they literally had nowhere else to go? All he was doing was increasing the chances of getting caught. As for Bluestone's treasure hunt itself, the gang were the ones who seemingly found all the clues. Perhaps if Bluestone had spent more time in the castle looking for the treasure instead of meticulously rigging ham sandwiches on wires, he might have gotten just a little bit closer to his goal. Bluestone gets a 2 out of 5 for operation. He was clever, but careless, and really didn't need to try scaring the kids away in the first place. His final do score is 2.3 out of 5.
How did you walk right through a solid wall?
One of my best acts. Let me give one last performance. Hold this rope.
It worked out well here, but in general, you do not give a professional stage magician wanted by the police an opportunity to show one last performance by untying him and giving him unfettered access to his props. That's just asking for him to escape. The gang's after-hours beach party is interrupted by a glowing deep-sea diving ghost. After a lifetime at sea, Captain Cutler and his wife decided to spend their golden years stealing yachts from a local marina and figured the best way to scare off investigators would be for Cutler to fake his own death and his wife to pretend to be a witch who resurrected her late husband as a vengeful, glowing spirit. The Cutlers had access to both a mini-sub to steal the ships and a hidden cave to hide them as they were being repainted for later resale. As the Cutlers were an elderly married couple, this was a decent plan as presumably they wouldn't need to sell that many yachts to fund comfortable retirement. With Cutler already being presumed dead, it wouldn't be that odd for his widow to leave the area and join him in another state or country to live out the rest of their days. Cutler had even shaved his trademark beard, so he could live openly wherever they ended up. The only real danger would have been Cutler getting caught during the stealing portion of the scheme, which we see is done by him towing the boats away using a mini-sub, presumably having sneaked onto the pier to untie or cut the lines holding the yachts in place. I am, however, only giving the Cutlers a 3 out of 5 for design. I would have given them a higher score except for one thing. Look at how many boats were stolen. We see 11 in this scene, and it's possible that there were more than that if the Cutlers had already sold any they'd previously stolen. At this point, the Cutlers were just being greedy, and it's unlikely they would have been able to have stolen that many without at least one witness to the mini-sub. Are we to believe that the marina wouldn't have hired a night watchman to look over the place where so many ships were stolen? Would the marina even still be in business? Because who in their right mind would be willing to store their property at a place with such lax security? The ghost of Captain Cutler is definitely one of the Scooby franchise's more memorable villains and ranks high in originality. An old-fashioned diving suit is already creepy enough, and when you add the glowing seaweed, it becomes even more scary. Imagine being in the dark sea and seeing a faint glow getting larger and larger, only to have this nightmare lunge toward you. You don't have to suffer from thalassophobia for this to be an effective deterrent for most meddlers. And considering the villain's plot involves hijackings at sea, his costume being a working dive suit complete with an air tank affords an easy escape route should the authorities close in on him. The Ghost of Captain Cutler gets a 5 out of 5 outfit score. As seen by how many ships the Cutlers were able to successfully steal, they definitely had the determination and skills to pull off their scheme. This was particularly impressive considering their age, and if nothing else, they deserve respect for that. Cutler was also smart enough to stay hidden from the gang for most of the episode and took his time trying to get them away from his hunting ground. He was also willing to protect himself and his wife at the expense of the lives of Fred, Daphne, and Velma. His decades at sea clearly made Captain Cutler a formidable villain willing to do what was necessary for his plot. That determination deserves a 5 out of 5 for Operation, making his final due score an impressive 4.3 out of 5.
Could that be Captain Cutler? Well, is it him?
No. Look at that old-fashioned diving suit. He's been down here 100 years.
Can I just take a moment to point out that Hanna-Barbera had the balls to feature a dead body on a Saturday morning television show aimed at children? Shaggy's stupidity results in the gang having to bunk down for the night at a guest ranch next to a deserted mining town where they run afoul of the ghost of a spooky prospector. The prospector ghost, dubbed the Miner 49er, was the creation of Hank, the caretaker for Big Ben's guest ranch, after discovering that his employer was sitting on a lucrative oil deposit and who wanted to scare off any guests to buy the land for cheap. A deserted mining town isn't exactly Las Vegas, so there couldn't have been that many guests for Hank to scare off in the first place, making his plot reasonably safe. But supposing that Hank had succeeded and Big Ben decided to sell off his failing business, surely the ranch owner would be suspicious that his old caretaker, who ran off the job in fear, would have returned to buy the land for himself. Granted, Hank could have set up a dummy corporation, but the fact that he couldn't afford to purchase the real estate at market value implies he couldn't afford a corporate attorney. And does this guy look savvy enough to navigate the complexity of the Secretary of State's office? Hank gets a 2.5 out of 5 for design. A prospector's ghost is reasonably original and does fit the setting of a ghost town. However, the costume itself could not have been that easy to manage, as stilt walking takes quite a bit of physical dexterity. Hank must have been a circus performer in his youth because he managed to not only balance so naturally on the stilts, but could also run convincingly. The originality takes a bit of a hit though, when the disguise itself is just a fake beard and buying the contents of Gabby Hayes' estate sale earlier that year. Would it have killed you, Hank, to douse yourself with some baby powder or glow stick liquid? Mechanics of the costume aside, grizzled old men hanging around abandoned mines are creepy in and of themselves, so the supernatural angle is just the sprinkles on top of the Miner 49er donut, bumping this villain's outfit score to a 3.5 out of 5. Like many Scooby villains, the Miner 49er is tripped up by his own sloppiness. In addition to constantly popping up where the gang are investigating, Hank decided to hide an incriminating map inside a cigar store statue, despite the map easily being small enough to fit in his wallet. Worse, the map also included the combination to the lock hiding the mineshaft elevator, allowing the gang to uncover even more of Hank's scheme. Apparently, old people writing down their passwords originated long before the internet was created. It's also pretty embarrassing for any villain to get caught by what is essentially a gag you might see in an old Roadrunner cartoon. Beep, beep. I'm giving Hank a 1.5 out of 5 for the operation. The extra half point is acknowledging that old age comes to us all. This leaves the Miner 49er with a due score of 2.5 out of 5.
But lately, he's been coming up here and scaring the guests away. And I'm going away in the morning myself.
During the scene when Hank is talking about the prospector haunting the old mine, Scooby sees an eye staring at them through a keyhole. That could not have been Hank, so it had to have been Big Ben doing the peeping. Girls, you might have something more to worry about than the minor 49er if the guy renting you your room likes secretly staring at his guests. Perhaps that's why Hank didn't trust hiding the map in his wallet if he knew that his boss was a creeper who didn't respect personal privacy. This time it's personal for Scooby and the gang as they investigate a series of dog nappings plaguing the city. This is one of the dumber villain plots in the Scooby universe. Buckmasters, the owner of a prize show dog, decides to have his own dog kidnapped, as well as all the others who might be a threat to his dog's chances at winning the next big show. His plan would have ultimately had his dog appear just before the show starts after having escaped, and thus easily clinching the win. This would make him literally the prime suspect in the kidnappings, as he would seem to be the one most likely to benefit. In addition, the reward money Masters offered for his dog's return was $500, and later dialogue makes it sound like that was what the kidnappers had demanded. Even for 1969, where $500 is the equivalent of roughly $4,000 today, this ransom amount seems a bit paltry for a well-to-do dog owner to balk at paying, and a reward too low to be considered worth the time for any traditional investigators. Ultimately, this entire scheme of Masters seems to be simply an ego boost for a wealthy dog owner determined for his prized canine to win Best of Show. Even if first place came with a cash prize, surely it wouldn't have been worth the expense of hiring henchmen to kidnap your competitors. If he was so determined to stroke his own ego, Masters should have just done what so many other bored middle-aged men with a bit of cash do, and simply cast himself as the star of a self-financed action film. This ridiculous villain plot gets a mere 1 out of 5 for design.
I was sure to win first prize at the County Dog Show this year. Now Bob Miller's Great Dane is a shoo-in.
Shouldn't Scooby find it just a little disquieting to be surrounded by all these framed dog photos and the actual taxidermied bodies of members of his own species? He certainly shouldn't be goofing off in there. Buckmaster's office should feel like Buffalo Bill's house to Scooby.
Leave this place, pale-faced intruders, or suffer fate of Spanish conquistadores buried in desert below.
Native American witch doctor? Yeah, this outfit certainly won't be winning any points for cultural sensitivity.
Are you sure it was a real Indian?
Real? Why, when he waved that tomahawk, even my hair was scared. Nobody's getting my beautiful hair. Look, Geronimo! He's back again!
And neither will the Scooby Gang for that matter. I guess a witch doctor costume is original, and it fits the villain's hideout at an abandoned Native American village, but wow. I'll just leave it here with a 1 out of 5 for the outfit. Setting aside the stupidity of Buckmaster's plan, the actual kidnappings were successful as his henchman was able to snatch 3 dogs from their owners, as well as Scooby acting as a decoy. Masters also ordered his henchman to kill Scooby and shot an arrow at the gang that just barely missed Shaggy. Gotta give him props for that. Speaking of the henchman, where was he when the gang were snooping around the hideout? Masters was seemingly on his own at that point, although this hand that pops out to push Scooby doesn't appear to belong to Masters. I suppose the henchman could have removed his gloves for some reason, since the skin tone does seem to match. The fact that pushing Scooby into the secret chute like that led him directly to rescuing Daphne and the other kidnapped dogs, which then led to capturing Masters, means it could have been the henchman, since he had been dumb enough to mistake Scooby for a show dog.
Who dognapped Scooby for ransom?
That's not Bob Miller's champion Great Dane. How could you mistake this mutt for a show dog?
Huh?
That's kind of harsh. Leave Scooby alone. Buckmasters gets a 2 out of 5 for the operation. While he was able to successfully steal all those dogs, his inability to hire competent help definitely lowers the score, as well as the fact that his own dog helped capture him in the end. You know, I can't stress that enough. What kind of asshole do you have to be to kidnap your own dog in the first place, as well as to be so disliked by that dog it chases you up a pole the moment it's rescued? This disgraced dog owner gets a do score of 1.3 out of 5.
Okay, this is it. Here we go.
I know I've said it before, but I love this production mistake where nobody is driving the mystery machine. And that's the end of part 1 of my villain ranking for the first season of Scooby-Doo Where Are You? Here's the current standings, and hopefully, I'll see you later for part 2. Thank you for watching. If possible, please like and subscribe to help my channel grow. I'm not saying my self-esteem is directly linked to the popularity of my channel, but I'm not saying my self-esteem is directly linked to the popularity of my channel.